good to see you. And thank you for joining us on Zoom today. I would like to, why don't we go around the room quickly and introduce ourselves. So I'm Ashley Campbell. I am the Executive Director at Legal Aid of North Carolina, and I'll call on Michael and then Alan.
I guess I assume I was Michael Neese. I'm from Gaston County, and I do criminal defense work here in Gaston County.
Hi, I'm Alan LaCroix from Morganton, and I'm a solo practitioner, general practice of law.
Hey, Alan, we'll go to Alice and then, Alice walked away. We'll go to Evan and then Camille.
Yeah, I'm Evan Rawls in Charlotte and am in the process of winding down my practice, Camille. So I'm of counsel now, and practiced criminal defense for 40 plus years.
Awesome.
And I'm Camille Stale. I work with Lawyers Mutual and specifically in the consulting subsidiary that we started about 5 years ago, Lawyers Mutual Consulting. And my primary job is working with lawyers who are winding down practices, succession planning, and otherwise looking for what their options are for their next stage.
Thank you, Camille. Now we'll go to Clark and then Julie Beavers.
I'm Clark Bell. I'm from Asheboro, Randolph County, a sole practitioner doing primarily criminal defense.
I'm Julie Beavers. I'm the Director of Client Services at Lawyers Mutual.
Good to have you here, Julie. We'll go to Barry and then Catherine Jean and then Alice.
Hi, I'm Barry McNeil, Deputy Counsel to the North Carolina State Bar.
And I'm Catherine Jean. I'm counsel to the North Carolina State Bar. Good morning or good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
And I'm Alice Mine. I'm the Executive Director of the State Bar.
Hey, Alice. And then, of course, Brian's already introduced himself. So wonderful to have you all here. We'll go ahead and jump right in. We've got a great agenda that Brian has helped put together for us today. So the first item of business is we want to approve the May 9th subcommittee report. It was attached to the agenda that was sent out with the calendar invitation. Does anyone have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any changes or additions or anything else we need to do to the minutes? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, so the motion passes. Now we'll move to our second item of business. So this is the update on our inventory lawyer designation in the State Bar membership database. So I'm going to turn this over to Brian.
Right, and this is just a very quick update. In our past subcommittee meetings, we talked about whether or not the State Bar could implement some sort of voluntary option for lawyers to designate a lawyer that could effectively kind of, hold the keys to the castle should something happen to the lawyer. And the State Bar needs a starting point to figure out just where are the passwords, what type of organization method was implemented, things of that nature. One of the ideas that we had was through the State Bar's membership portal, which is now entirely online, that perhaps we could have a data field that lawyers could fill out, similar to how they fill out their firm name, their address, things of that nature. I did speak with our programmers, and this is possible. They think that, as far as where we put it, whether we make it a part of the membership renewal when you pay your annual dues, or some other process that somebody can just voluntarily go through, those are options that are all on the table. But as far as programming it right now, it is, it's one of those things that will get in line because there are a number of other changes, including we just went live with our new case management system for the Office of Counsel, and there's some CLE rules that, as you all know, were recently changed that require a lot of programming. So the good news is that this is a part of the conversation now, and I've already reached out to them about this. They feel very optimistic about that option. So as we continue our discussion of what the State Bar wants to provide, this is definitely an option to consider. So good news on that front.
Thanks, Brian. Any questions for Brian?
Oh, and Ashley, if I can just throw one little thing, I called it an inventory lawyer. We have been, and this is the reason I put that there is because we have been talking about just what do we call this person? They're not exactly a successor. This is somebody that the lawyer designates that the state bar or the court system can go to if that lawyer suddenly is incapacitated. I saw in a number of other jurisdictions the reference to what they called an inventory lawyer and thought that was appropriate. So unless there's some sort of objection, I know we were going back and forth with a successor attorney and things of that nature, or a trustee, even though trustee is kind of a designated term. I'm going to go with inventory lawyer for now, but I just wanted to make sure you all understood that's what was meant by the term inventory lawyer.
Thanks, Brian. Any comments or questions? Okay, so now we will move to our presentation. We're so happy to have Camille and Julie here from Lawyers Mutual. I know so many of us have worked with them in various capacities, and just thrilled that they're here to share their expertise with us. So they're going to do a presentation today on succession planning efforts at Lawyers Mutual. So we'll turn it over to you, Camille and Julie.
Thank you. We are very happy to be here, and thank you to Alice Mine for inviting us to be a part of this presentation, and to everyone else from Brian to Ashley who made it happen. Lawyers Mutual has a long history of being involved with succession planning. I think when we met with Brian earlier today, he said he could find articles or presentations back in 2010, 2011. It's something that Camille invested a lot of time when she was in the role that I currently hold at Lawyers Mutual, which is the head of client services and risk management. But Lawyers Mutual has been active in this lane for a long time, from CLEs to a toolkit that we offer free on our website, and then just articles and collaborations with the Bar Association, who has also been very active in this area in terms of succession planning. And when you think of succession planning, there's different ideas that come up, but for clarification, for where we've been active, and we know that other organizations within North Carolina have been active, we see three clear lanes here of succession planning. One of which is to help lawyers wind down their practice. Now that could be that they're completely just retiring, and that'll be the end of the road for that law practice. We know that the Bar Association had that tool, turning out the lights, as well as the Transitioning Lawyers Commission, where Camille, Mark Scruggs, and I have all held leadership roles in that group. There's been lots of good information on helping lawyers turn out the lights on law practice so they can go into a traditional retirement. Another lane is going into I want to step down from my practice, and I want to transfer, this value to someone else. I want to sell my practice. And that's an area where Camille has been very active, along with our good friend Tomlin Festi of the Lawyers Practice Exchange, where they are brokering the sale of law practices. And then the third area is more of that backup lawyer, or now, as Brian Otten is saying, the inventory lawyer, where you've got someone that you trust in the legal community to step in should you find yourself in an emergency situation, whether that's illness, sudden death. There needs to be someone who has access to the keys to the castle, the passwords to your computers. They know how to come in and help with the client files. So I think for the most part, this subcommittee is probably looking at that third lane, but we wanted to share with you today all the wonderful things that Lawyers Mutual has been doing in this area of traditional succession planning in terms of winding down practices or selling a law practice. And, this really is Camille Stale's calling card. She is our resident expert. She left Lawyers Mutual in the traditional sense in 2018 to be the president CEO of Lawyers Mutual Consulting and Services, which is a subsidiary of Lawyers Mutual. But she's been very active in this area. So I'd like for her to kind of take over now that we've kind of established a little bit of an outline of where we've been busy at Lawyers Mutual, and ways that we could help this subcommittee move forward. Camille?
So thank you, Julie, and thanks to everyone for allowing me to come and chat with you today. In in about 2008, 2009, 2010, as we were seeing the impact of the recession, we were seeing the number of young lawyers who were getting out of law school, who didn't have jobs available and who were looking to start their own practice. About this time is when Tomlin Festi, who's a member of the bar, he's a licensed lawyer, a practicing lawyer, and a CPA and business broker. We began to have conversations. Tom is going to be, I think, one of your speakers at the Legal Deserts Summit next week. And so you'll hear more from him, but we began having these discussions, and the way they originally started was we've got a lot of baby boomers who will be retiring soon, and we've got all these young lawyers entering the profession. We really ought to find a way to connect these people. And fast forwarding a couple of years, that really did not work out to be the very best option, right? The young lawyers were coming in, as you would expect from law school, with no real practical experience, lots of law school debt, no real way to buy a law practice. And most of the lawyers at that time who were thinking about their next steps were thinking about retirement within a certain time frame, right? Like it's not uncommon to get a phone call that says, I'm going to retire by the end of the year. And so that model didn't take off the way that we had sort of anticipated it would. But what began to happen was lots of education. So CLE programs on what your options are. And that included, with assisting attorney, or what you're now calling inventory lawyers, kind of the process and procedure for that, as well as creating, packets for lawyers to review as they were thinking about retiring or winding down their practices. At the same time, I also began seeing a real transition, say 5 years later, in the kinds of calls that I took at Lawyers Mutual. So client services, risk management, what technology platforms should I purchase for my estate planning firm? How do I get more clients? How do I set up a docketing system? Those were sort of the bread and butter of what I did every day, right? I just talked to people on the phone and answered questions for them about practice management, how to run a law firm. And that really began to shift. I began talking to a lot of young lawyers on starting up law firms. So those were still the questions, but certainly more lawyers who were inquiring about retiring or winding down a practice. And so, I suggested that we sort of pull those services out from the traditional Lawyers Mutual work and really set up an entity that was geared to, spend time learning about these topics and how to best help folks. And so that's what I've been doing, for the past several years. This, as Julie mentioned, we started a subsidiary in late 2018. And then certainly during the pandemic, I've gotten even more calls from lawyers saying, in 2020, I don't want to take my law practice to the cloud, so I just need to wind down. And at that point, we were not having a ton of conversations about buying and selling. We were just talking about how to wind down a practice. So I thought one of the things that might be helpful for you guys to hear is just that shift at Lawyers Mutual. The reason we became interested in the topic is because the topic became of interest to our insureds. We definitely have an aging book of insureds. We see it in our clientele. Very long time, lawyers who practiced 40 and 50 years, who were beginning to have a whole different set of needs that they were looking to us to help them solve. So I thought I'd kind of walk you through what what one of my consult with a client typically looks like. So this isn't one person. This is just, a basic idea of what happens and the kind of questions people have and how I help them answer them. And then I think that kind of opens the door for more conversations about what is the state bar going to do? How does the state bar work with organizations that are already doing things so that, everybody's not recreating the wheel all the time. So it's not unusual for me to get a call from a lawyer who says, hey, I listened to one of your CLEs a few years ago. You talked about selling a practice. I don't really know what that means. I'm thinking about what my next steps might be. I've got, a good friend across the hall, practicing, a lot less years than I am. They're interested in helping me with this process. We just don't know what to do. And so I will continue to have I'll have a call with just that lawyer, or I may have a call with the two of them, say we'll call them the retiring lawyer and the successor. And so it can go either way, but typically I charge a fee and we do a 90-minute consult. And in that conversation, the lawyers are asking things like, what are our next steps? What do we do? What are my options? And the what are my options question, it has really started generating in the last several years. The first several years of calls were, I'm going to retire. What do I do? Now, I think people are reading more, seeing more about these options. And so they call and say, what are my options? And so we kind of talk through that pretty simply, and not unlike Julie, did with us at the beginning of the call. If you're, 80 and you have a kind of a handful of clients left and you're really just sort of looking to, hand off those few, you've already got somebody who's willing to do that. You just want to know the practical steps, like, what does the state bar say I need to do? What does Lawyers Mutual say I need to do? Like, help me identify those things. And that's what we do. We sort of go through and we identify, you're going to need a letter to your clients advising them of your retirement status. You're going to want to call your malpractice carrier and you want to talk to them about, closing down your practice and what that's going to look like for insurance or for tail coverage. So we talk through options. But a common conversation these days is, I know that these options exist and this is what I want to do. And now, can you help me do it? So for instance, the first thing I say is we need a date. We need a retirement date. And you might not be surprised to know that that's when a lot of folks go, whoa. Now, what do you mean we need a retirement date? I'm just thinking about this. And I say, well, you kind of led your conversation saying you've been thinking about this for the past 5 years. And perhaps that young person sitting at the table has also called me and said, oh my God, Camille, we've been talking about this for 5 years. We've got to take action. And so I just think that's the first and most important thing that we can do is we have to get you a retirement date set, because without having a date set, you just aren't moving forward, right? You're not going to start compiling that client list. You're not going to start drafting that lawyer to clients. You're not going to reach out to, the web provider and tell them to cut your website off at a certain date. So through, conversations that day or through homework that I give them, we end up with a retirement date. And so let's say, that here we are, we're towards the end of August and we're going to set a retirement date of November 1. And great, that's good. Now we know what we're working towards. And so I typically talk through with them and their successor, if they have that person ready and we can both talk. The very first and most common questions are, what does your open file count look like? And so we go through that. And what are your plans for those files? And, if it's a litigator, they may say, I have 2 more cases set. One is set for trial the end of this year, one set for, early next year. Okay, great. So we get a lay of the land. And then we talk through, or in many of these cases, not all, but in many of these cases, they're looking for that bridge of an of counsel relationship with that successor. This is not someone who's buying their law firm. This is someone who is going to help them with cases and managing those cases to the end, as well as be a referral for those cases that, a lawyer who's practiced for 50 years still is going to get a lot of questions about, can you help me with this legal matter? And if not, who would you recommend? So we have a date. We talk through what caseload looks like. We talk through who is going to bring the case to completion. Retiring lawyer, what are your steps? Successor lawyer, are you involved? To what extent are you involved? How are you involved? How are you going to be involved? And we just talk through, what does that look like? It may look like an of counsel arrangement. It may look like a disengagement by a lawyer and a new engagement by the successor. So that is a question that has to be answered sort of uniquely, but it's a general roadmap of what everyone talks through. Then we begin to talk through, what does the transition of communication look like? You've got an email, retiring lawyer has an email address, a website, and a phone number, typically, right? And you don't want to disappear. Some lawyers do, and that's a different conversation, right? Let's set a date, cut these things off. But some lawyers don't want to disappear, right? They've got those 2 cases that are still hanging out there. They've got this referral relationship that they want to help the successor lawyer with. So it's not uncommon that those 2 folks are on completely different systems, right? The younger lawyer may have, the Google Suite and the sort of independent website company that works for them, and a Google phone number, whereas the retiring lawyer may have Microsoft Outlook, they may have a Fine Law website account, and they may have a receptionist who answers phone calls. So we talk through, how do we combine those things? We're going to stop the old practice on November 1. So we've got from now until then to figure out, what are we going to do? And so in a typical of counsel relationship, the new firm, the established successor firm says, I'm going to get the lawyer a new email address. I'm going to, get them a bio on my website that says of counsel, and they'll use my phone number. And so then that goes on the action items for the retiring lawyer. I need to close down, my website. I need to, cut off my phone service, and I need to start telling clients about this new email address. And so all of that would be typically addressed in that letter to clients, where you're announcing your retirement date, your new contact information, and your successor information. You also, you have to follow those state rule guidelines. You can't tell people where you're going to send their file. You have to give them the option. But very often I see, clients are welcome to that referral and introduction by the retiring lawyer to the successor lawyer. So I'll catch a breath for a minute to just see if anybody has any questions so far about sort of the the process that we're walking through.
I don't see any questions, but yeah, and just to be clear, everyone, I talked with Camille earlier, and she absolutely welcomes your questions while she's speaking. So feel free to just unmute if you have a question.
Yeah. So then, once we've kind of laid out this framework for what it's going to look like, there's a lot of flexibility between the retiring lawyer and the successor. One of the things they're going to want to talk about is money, right? And again, I'm not talking about a traditional sale of practice where, you agree on an amount and you sell them the practice. We're really talking about a retiring lawyer who is going to close down their practice, and then they are going to join another firm as of counsel to provide sort of a soft landing for them and a transition point for their clients. And so, auditing client files becomes important, knowing, on the phone, we might have guesstimated at, those 2 trials and those 7 or 8 ongoing clients. Now we're, the lawyer's really going to get down to brass tacks, and they're going to look at their client files. They're going to determine, according to the state bar's retention guidelines, what are they keeping? What are they getting rid of? They are, preparing their law firm to close down. And I have checklists that I share with them, that help them, along that path. And then the successor lawyer is beginning to make those plans for, are they going to move into my office? Are they going to, rent space from me? A lot of times, these folks may already work in the same space and they're doing an office share, and so the physical location isn't going to change, but everything else is. So we outline logistics. We determine action items so that people know what it is they need to do, and they are then holding each other accountable. But I'm also in the background. If they need me for questions, they can always give me a call. We can talk through things. But at the end of that 90-minute consult call, I'm following up with an email to both of them, or to, depending on how the conversation was, right, with just the successor lawyer, or if I was talking just the retiring lawyer, or if I was talking with both of them, to the retiring lawyer and the successor lawyer. And I'm, summarizing our conversation. I'm outlining those action steps that they need to take, and I'm sharing a checklist with them. And then sometimes I never hear from them again. And other times they'll call, they'll have a question or two. And, we just kind of move forward. And at some point in time, I'll see a letter or a notice that they've, gone off counsel with a new firm, or, that they've retired, or, I kind of find out the rest of the story just by hearing about it. Or they've given me an update, in 3 to 6 months to tell me, where they are and how things are going. There are a lot of other options as well, as Julie mentioned. So, sometimes I'm working with retiring lawyers who are thinking about merging, their solo or small firm practice with another practice. Sometimes these retiring lawyers have had other lawyers in their community, to come to them. But what I'll tell you is the biggest challenge that I see is the concept that the state bar is very familiar with and has a subcommittee addressing, and that's legal deserts. A lot of lawyers talk to me about their desire to retire, but they just feel they can't because there is no other lawyer in the community. And so, this is certainly a bigger problem and a bigger issue than a checklist can solve. But they do often call for advice on that. And, I do help them kind of figure out what to do there. And sometimes that involves, thinking about not only just retirement, but actually thinking about maybe merging with another firm and, trying to get a firm in another geographic location to actually establish a footprint in their community. And the tough thing there is that works great as long as you've got somebody in that community to work. But if this lawyer, in fact, wants to retire in 3 months to 18 months, that's not a long-term solution, perhaps. Another thing they may do is they may say, Camille, there's still 5 lawyers in town, but all of us are 80. So it's not going to help us to merge or to join together or join forces in any way. So that's a real challenge. And I think about lots of solutions to the challenge. I present options. We talk through things. Some small communities may experience just having out-of-town lawyers who hold in-office days a couple of days a week or a couple of days a month. You might not can convince a larger firm or a mid-sized firm to open a full-time office in your area, but maybe they just staff it by appointment. I think there are plenty of law firms that do that anyway. I think Brian King in the mountains, as opposed to our Brian King, down east, Brian King in the mountains has a very interesting law firm model. He primarily does family law. I think he has about 20 offices. And he has not many more lawyers than that, right? Like maybe 25 lawyers, 20 offices. So what you probably know immediately is he's got small offices all over Western North Carolina. And I think now even into South Carolina, but, small offices in these small communities. So he runs a robust recruiting program. He hires 5 to 6 summer associates every year through the North Carolina law schools. He has them rotate through their offices. He's looking for folks who are particularly either interested in moving to Western North Carolina or have ties to Western North Carolina. So I think Brian has found an excellent way to work on, succession planning and sort of working against legal deserts in his little corner of the world that I really think could be replicated in other places across North Carolina as well. It's certainly not realistic that the Womble Bond Dickinsons of the world are going to open, satellite offices in, Chakawinity, North Carolina. My nod to Julie Beavers, right? That's not going to happen. But, how about some of our other friends in larger offices in Eastern North Carolina? Might they be willing to also have that, Chakawinity sort of geographic location as part of their office? Maybe they don't buy real estate there, but maybe they, rent an office and they establish office hours a certain amount of time, or they, set up hours by appointment. So I do think that there are options. I think that the least likely, and this is solely my opinion, not sanctioned by, Lawyers Mutual or State Bar or anyone else, right? But my opinion is that the hardest lift is going to be to convince a great number of young lawyers to move to Chakawinity, North Carolina, to open their law practice. I don't think that's a realistic option. So I think it's a noble idea. I don't think it's what's going to work. But I also don't think it's absolutely necessary. I do think that you can be engaged in a community without having to spend every night in that community. You know, I know lawyers already who are working in, you know, in their home location, you know, their offices in Fayetteville, but they spend really more time at their mountain home than they do in Fayetteville, but their community doesn't see that suffer, right? They still show up for important events. They maintain those relationships. They're still training new lawyers in their office. But the remote ability that technology has allowed us, I think, can help solve some of those concerns. I don't want to get too far afield by talking about a ton of options. I know that today was really kind of focused on succession. And so I'll kind of stop there and let Julie comment and then see what questions you might have.
And so what Camille has addressed would be those first two lanes that I previously mentioned, you know, the winding down of a law practice or a sell of a law practice. And, you know, Lawyers Mutual and now Lawyers Mutual Consulting been very active in those two lanes along with outside organizations. But that third lane that I think we're all kind of concerned about is the lawyers who don't have a backup plan for the unexpected. And a way that Lawyers Mutual addresses that is we have what is called the HELP team, and the HELP stands for Handling Emergency Legal Problems. And a lot of times that's when we have to kind of go in with a couple of our claims attorneys and maybe someone in risk management, client services, or even with Camille or Eric Manzoni, when emergency has happened, someone's died unexpectedly. And a lot of times we kind of go into those law firms, you know, with the state bar, because we're all having to get in there and kind of help manage those cases and get them properly, I guess, updated and siphoned off to another law firm so that the clients and the public are not harmed. And so we already have an arm, but we're busy with the help calls. Now, we don't get them on a regular basis, but when we do, we jump in with both feet forward. And most of the time that is in alignment with the North Carolina State Bar. So I just wanted to add in that third component that addresses that third lane that I mentioned.
And I was just going to say, in our experience with the HELP team, you know, that really is for the solo small firm office. If you're in a firm of any size, you know, you likely have a lot of safeguards around you to help with that. But in that, you know, solo practice where the lawyer died and the paralegal is calling us, you know, a couple of days later, or in that 3-attorney firm where your only real estate lawyer is suddenly in the hospital for an extended period of time, and you've got 2 other lawyers there, but they are litigators. They don't know what to do with real estate. Lawyers Mutual comes in and triages that situation. And it's not typically that we're providing the ultimate service. We are typically hiring someone to come in. So for instance, we, you know, Lawyers Mutual would come in and we would hire a real estate lawyer to go to that firm's office and meet with the real estate paralegal and see what's on the calendar, what can we postpone, what can we move to someone else, you know, if there's a closing on the books tomorrow, what's our best form of triage. So, you know, that's typically how we run the HELP team. It is emergency help for firms that really have no one who can step in, but there's not yet a need for a trustee to be appointed by the state bar, right? It hasn't either gotten to that level, or they do have some people there, they just don't know what to do.
Camille, you mentioned that you charge a fee. And I also had a question about how's that fee structure work, but also if they're not insured by Lawyers Mutual, how is that handled?
So with the HELP team, we can only provide that assistance if they're insured. For the consulting services on succession, I can consult with anyone, whether they're insured or not. And so while a good deal of my calls are from insureds, I do, work with folks who aren't insured. And the consult, just sort of the quickest and in that 90-minute time frame, I charge $350. And that's for the 90-minute call, the summary follow-up, the list of resources. And then, if they need to reach out again and they say, would you just look at my letter to clients? Or I've got a question about, how to execute on this one thing, that's kind of all included. And then, there's an hourly rate if people want me to assist them through transition. And then for coming in and actually doing a succession plan for a law firm, that's typically a larger flat fee project with a couple of different components, like a discovery process and a implementation process. And that typically runs more along the lines of like a $7,500 to $10,000 arrangement.
Thank you.
Who else has questions for Camille?
Camille,
Or
I have
Julie?
a couple of questions. How widespread is your efforts at this point? Are you getting a good response from the small firm solo practitioners? Because this is it's kind of the last thing in line that a lot of lawyers do because they're dealing with everyday crises. But how's your response been?
It has been less than I would have expected. I really thought the phone would kind of ring nonstop. And that's just not the case. I find that a lot of people just that plan to retire with their wingtips on is really very much what happens. And I might get an inquiry from someone with very good intentions and there's no follow through to that. So, I would say on an average month, I probably talk to, maybe 10 to 12 folks a month on, thinking about retirement and what that might look like for them. Certainly not the numbers of people that we're actually seeing on the insurance side that we actually lose to retirement every month.
Yeah. Well,
I think
one of the things that we've been looking at in this subcommittee is whether or not to instigate a rule change that would create mandatory succession planning. And we've looked at that and we've kind of put that off to the side. So the only other alternative is sort of a voluntary compliance with lawyers. And that's why I asked this about the response you get, because I just get the feeling that if it's voluntary, and even if we publicize it at the state bar, it's going to be the last thing in line that most lawyers do. And so, but I think we're going to hold off on any mandatory rule changes because that becomes kind of its own kind of mission creep in a way with enforcement and all kinds of administrative headaches. But have you got any suggestions about how the state bar could spread the word about this voluntary compliance with succession planning?
It's hard to get people's attention. And that's no fault of the individual. It's the world we live in. It's hard to get people's attention. And I do, like I say, get inquiry calls and emails from people who have the very best of intentions, but we'll spend 6 months just trying to schedule a phone call, and oftentimes we just never, it kind of never comes to fruition. So, you know, the way at Lawyers Mutual that we just approached it, like I say, from about 2010 or in those years, kind of between 2010, 13, is we just a constant drip of information. And there's some of you who are Lawyers Mutual insureds who would say, I don't ever remember seeing anything about that. Right. And if it's not on your mind today, you probably didn't see it, right? Any more than you saw the cyber ad for insurance. If that's not something that's on your mind, it doesn't mean that there's anything inherently wrong with anyone for not availing themselves of the resources. It's just hard to get that message. And so I think anywhere that we can all be sort of pushing out, this concept and idea, whether it's through CLEs or articles in your publications as well as our publications, that we just continue having the conversation. I do think one thing that I'm that we're going to see as a result of both generational change, but also sort of more education and awareness, is that there's a whole group of lawyers coming up who have no intention of dying with their wingtips on. One, they don't know what wingtips are. Two, they're not going to wear wingtips. And so, they and their Skechers are going to go live their best life somewhere, sometime, doing something else. So it's a problem that's going to sort of take care of itself over time. I'm talking to more and more 55 and 60-year-olds who say, I cannot be doing this when I'm 75. And so, what do I do to get myself ready for that? That's got a whole other set of issues and problems on the other side of it as well, right? This group of lawyers now that really needs to be impacted by this, I do think they're the ones that read your publications, read our publications, show up for in-person CLEs. And so to the best that we can continue the conversation in those traditional ways, hopefully our traditional bar member will take advantage of those opportunities.
And Evan, something I would mention, and I shared this earlier with Brian, I know of one local bar where when they were first getting back to meeting in person after pandemic, one of their action items was to talk about having that backup lawyer, this inventory lawyer, because in that particular bar, it is primarily small firms or solo practitioners. So for them, it is essential to have a backup plan because there aren't big firms in the area that are going to step in and help. So I think whatever this subcommittee recommends to the committee to take action, whether it's a CLE, but you walk away with a plan at the end of that program, or it's the writing. But I think that we could do that, that global push for information, but also reach out to the local bars, because when they get information from the state bar, they listen. Because regardless if it has that mandatory stamp, the state bar's information carries a lot of weight. So there's this highly recommended path for North Carolina lawyers. I believe folks will at least stop and listen. Whereas when we're pushing out general information, it just gets folded into the daily practice woes. And so I just do believe that anything the state bar does, whether it's just a firm stance, potential mandatory action down the road, people are going to stop and listen.
It also might be in the form of not necessarily labeled as an alert, but those targeted emails that you often send out from time to time, like alerts, potential scams and things like that. That could be maybe an impactful source there to say, have you thought about these issues? And here are 3 resources to look at. While you may have a list of 20, you can then link back to your publication or whatever. And I'm going to speak to that too for a quick second. But, I often get more traction off of that individual email that's only promoting one thing at a time, as opposed to the newsletter email that's a little easier to sit in the box. So that might be something. The one thing I wanted to say, I mentioned early on about like, we don't want to particularly duplicate efforts because nobody's got time for that anymore. Lawyers Mutual has a ton of these, 100-page resources. And I may have said that on this call already, but, lawyers just don't have time for that. And what I see is people will say, okay, well, you sent me that 100-page treatise, Camille. Now tell me, answer my question, please. So I think effective means of communicating are, shorter articles with lots of hyperlinks to resources, list of resources, and ebooks. People, I think, might open a 12-page ebook, just a PDF document, quicker than they want to open 100-page with, 75 form letters in it.
Yeah, Camille, I agree with both you and Julie on that, because when we started this cybersecurity committee, and I'm the chair of that committee, but we had 5 different work groups compiling information and sort of checklists and self-assessment things. And on the first pass, when everybody came in, we had like 500 questions and things. And we just had to keep cutting it and cutting it and cutting it down to the essentials and looking what really talks to the small firm and the solo practitioner and does it in a way that's engaging and quick and straightforward. And Lawyers Mutual now is sponsoring this, which we thank them for greatly. And I can't wait to get this thing in final form and load it up and get the North Carolina Bar Association going with it and other groups. But this also, as succession planning, I think I mentioned before, this might be sort of the second chapter for a self-assessment by the state bar. And so, we're all part of this committee, but we might be leaning some on you, Camille and Julie, to look. I mean, I read the 200 pages that Ashley sent out. And there's a lot of duplicative checklists and things, but there's some really valuable stuff in there that if you can distill it and boil it down to, 30 or 31 things, then that's going to hit the self-assessment of the sole practitioner. And Julie, you are right. The key to this is the local bar associations. If we can get the local bar associations to, publicize this and get this information out to their local lawyers, and maybe even, have it identify a single person that kind of spearheads this effort in every local bar. But that's, all of this stuff, this subcommittee is still very young. We got a lot of ground to plow, but anyway, so that's sort of my thoughts, and I want to thank you both very much. It's just extremely, extremely helpful, and it's great stuff that Ashley sent out from Lawyers Mutual that you guys have put together.
Thank you. And Camille and Mark and I have been a part of multiple bar association CLEs on succession planning. So I know they have links to those programs. Obviously, there's fees associated with the replays of those CLEs, but there are some really good resources that already exist. So whatever the state bar could do to point, the North Carolina lawyers to look at the resources that already exist, as Brian says, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel there, but then create this other call to action from the state bar for lawyers to step up and take responsibility for creating this plan would be so helpful. And Lawyers Mutual will be definitely a big supporter or whatever you guys need in that lane, because we think it's very important. And plus, it could also drive a lot of people to Camille, who could really help with more, sophisticated, enriched work in this lane. And also to Tomlin Festi at the Law Practice Exchange, and whatever we can do to keep that work in state is very important.
Thank you, Julie and Camille. I have a question. It's a really practical question for Brian and Alice about, making all of this information available into some way or to lawyers. And, on the State Bar website, there's the For Lawyers drop down, and there's lots of great stuff there. But there's Pathways to Wellbeing, which tracks that well-being part of the journal. I mean, is there any place where we could have a succession planning sort of toolkit, succession planning materials on the State Bar website?
I feel like the answer is yes. We're going to be looking at, I know we've been talking about a website overhaul at some point, and that can be a part of the different sections that we have. But yes, I think we have the opportunity here, like, we've all been talking about, and I know, Camille was talking about checklists and so forth. So, it may not be effective for the State Bar to create its own checklist when there's one from the Bar Association and the Lawyers Mutual and so forth. And so I think just as far as the resources that are available, even if there is some sort of thing, the end product, and this kind of segues into that last discussion point on the agenda.
And you can go ahead and do that if you want to. It's yours.
Well, sure. And it's just, there's clearly, a couple of different options that we have here and some discussion that needs to be had. But one thing that we could do, instead of recreating all these materials that are officially therefore from the State Bar, is just to have some sort of resource, like a toolkit that's easy to navigate, that is easily digested by anyone who's looking at it. Because what I'm hearing from Camille and Julie in talking about their experience, it sounds like folks are being proactive, maybe just to the extent, or at least more proactive than in the past, about thinking about it. But taking that next step is still a daunting thing. It's kind of a, where do you start? And so if that can be something that we provide a resource outlining, well, what are the ethical responsibilities? Just as lawyers, what is our professional responsibility? And here's where you can look to find these next steps. Maybe we can point folks in the right direction with our resource. How that looks, like we're talking about a toolkit, but I'm thinking just maybe it's a couple page publication that has a couple of different resources that really can outline the different considerations, but make it really easy. If a lawyer says, I'm thinking about selling my law practice, what are my professional responsibilities? Well, there's an ethics opinion that we can point folks to. And how do you actually do it? Who do I consult? And perhaps that's something to point over to Tom with the Law Practice Exchange, to the Lawyers Mutual, to the different resources that can answer some of those specific questions that a lawyer may have. So that's one option, and especially in light of the different kind of thoughts shared today of the availability and the abundance of other resources. That our most effective thing may be to kind of distill some of that and point folks in the right direction.
And I think I'm hearing, based on this conversation today, as well as conversations we've had in the past, that we do need some place where it would be nice to have a resource for lawyers on the State Bar website that links to all of these other resources. I don't think anybody on the committee is proposing that we recreate all of these ourselves, and just put all of these resources for lawyers in one place. And then it sounds like we also, feel like we need education around this. So whether that's CLE, articles in the State Bar Journal, educating our leadership about the importance of this issue as they go out and give speeches to local bar associations, et cetera. Maybe even educating our counselors about how to give an update on this at a local, bar meeting with a PowerPoint, for example. So I think we've got a lot of good ideas about what types of next steps we may want to take. So what other questions or thoughts or comments are there from the group today about what we've talked about? Alice?
Sorry, I need to unmute myself. So I was curious, Camille and Julie, if Lawyers Mutual does anything in its annual renewals, or how often your insureds have to renew or declare, that asks them if they have identified a successor or an inventory attorney or anything like that? And if not, why not? Why not make that a part of the inquiries that it's not a requirement, but I think the fact that you're merely suggesting it to your insureds might actually be a way of pushing compliance with that. So why not if you're not doing that?
Presently, we are not asking that question on the renewal form or even the application form. But after you and I had our conversation at the airport, I'm coming back from New Orleans, or where was it? I can't recall where we were, Alice. But I did speak with Dan, our CEO, and we are going to loop in our head of underwriting because we want to add that question to our forms as just another way to plant the seed that this is a really smart process to your law firm management. And it's something we highly encourage. Obviously, we've got articles written about, having that type of backup plan. And actually, something else when you and Brian were talking about just curating of what's already out there, you're not going to find a lot of information on that inventory lawyer or the backup plan. And I think that's where the state bar will need to create some content, whereas the other areas, the other two lanes, I think are just overflowing with information and checklists. But the importance of having a backup lawyer if you're a solo or in a small firm, I think that is critical to the mission of everyone here on the call.
And I think in the past, for a question like that, we would have probably relied on the state bar procedure, for if it was mandatory to have a assisting lawyer, we would have them list that on the application. I think back in the 90s, I think we may have had the assisting lawyer question on there. And I think most of the time it just went unanswered. Just the blank, left the blank. And probably a lot of people would say they didn't even know what it meant.
What if it was not a mandatory obligation, but each year the state bar with our annual dues notice, and which is also going to become our CLE notice now, we also put that on there. Not that you have to answer the question, but sort of a suggestion as a way of sort of pushing people to do that. If we did that as a voluntary thing, would you all sort of pick up on that at all, do you think? Lawyers?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, we're already in discussions about this. We're not at the point of discussing whether there should be a discount, a policy premium associated with that, but we are willing to look at the form to ask the question to get lawyers thinking about what is it I need to be doing this and how to do it. And obviously, we would then point them to the state bar website on the how to do it.
It just strikes me that this is not, it's like the same thing with the legal deserts, is not a single solution.
Right.
It's more about, educating people and getting them to think about it. Ashley, to your point about, could we put something on the website? We absolutely can. I mean, we could do it right now. We are going to be doing a North Carolina State Bar website refresh very soon to try to bring ourselves, into more contemporary formats and all of that. One of the problems with the website, at least now, is that, you can put articles on there, but do people find them?
Yeah.
And so, I just sitting here thinking about this, what would be really nice is if we could, get all of the entities that are interested in this, the Lawyers Mutual, maybe other insurance carriers, bar association, whatnot, to all have a sort of a regular emphasis on this question, whether that's in the Bar Association's newsletter or the state bar doing some push notifications. And I'm also thinking this needs to be one of those things where it's little bullets. It's not long things that because lawyers now just don't have time. So if you want to get their attention, you need to give it to them in something that's really quickly digestible. And the state bar could certainly do that. We try not to abuse our ability to email every lawyer in the state, but it seems like there could be some targeted efforts to do that also have to be repeated. It can't be just months and yay, we're done. Congratulations to us. Something that's like a long-term effort that just continues. So just some thoughts off the top of my head as we were talking about it.
I agree with that, Alice. I think you really need cultural change, right? I mean, I think folks have to view it as one of their ethical responsibilities in order to get them to participate. So it's 5 after 3. If there aren't any other questions or comments today, I'd like to thank our guests so much for the great content today and for offering, or most importantly, for being our friends and supporters and for offering to help and to provide some of the information that Lawyers Mutual has prepared for its insureds to assist us in this work. I think the next best step is probably for Brian and I and Barry and whoever else wants to get together with us to start sort of pulling together some proposals for all of you to look at and decide if we want to accept or reject some of these ideas that have been offered and what that plan might look like. So I'll plan to get back together with Brian and Barry. If any of you feels really passionate and would like to be involved in that smaller decision-making process, please just let Brian or me know. And we'll be in touch soon to schedule our next meeting. We'll try to do one more meeting before our next quarterly meeting. Brian, anything else, or Barry, anything else? Okay. Thank you all so much.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Camille and Julie.
Thanks.
Absolutely.